You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show.
You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this week, as we are really kind of ending the season of Epiphany and getting ready for Lent, we're going to talk about the Transfiguration found in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. So Zach, do your thing with this reading for today.
Yeah, certainly. Hear from the Gospel of Mark. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and brought them to the top of a very high mountain where they were alone. He was transformed in front of them, and his clothes were amazingly bright, brighter than if they had been bleached white. Elijah and Moses appeared and were talking to Jesus. Peter reacted to all this by saying, "Rabbi, it's good that we are here. Let's make 3 shrines, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And he said this because he didn't know how to respond. For the 3 of them were terrified. Then the cloud overshadowed them, and the voice spoke from the cloud, "This is my son, whom I dearly love. Listen to him." Suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them not to tell anyone what they had seen until after the human one had risen from the dead. So, Matt, as you hear the story of the Transfiguration, it's a fun story. Where did I go? It's a fun story.
What comes up
with
you? To like transfigure and appear because you disappeared off the screen. Like I thought you were. I really thought you were doing this for dramatic effect.
I wish I was now.
For me, I don't know, like this is actually one of my favorite sermons to preach, and even it's actually one of my favorite readings. Because you just you definitely have as Zach transfigured into existence. Okay, squirrel gone, good. I love this because it's like it's totally how we would respond if we were one of the 3. And Jesus said, "Hey, let's go up, and I'm gonna show you this really cool thing." And somebody in the group would act, "We have to make a T-shirt for this."
Right.
One that it has to have Moses on it. It has to have Elijah, and it has to have Jesus, and it has to look really cool. And I almost like, I don't know. There's an excitement about it, but then like, what's really cool about it is you have this high holy experience. Obviously, it's going to be a high holy experience because we're going up a mountain, so we know that we're going to be closer to God and in the Hebrew line of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And but what's interesting is, and I love how this like idea of not only does Jesus transform in front of them to really show Jesus's fullness of being the Son of Man. The other side of that is what comes next. It literally leans us into Lent. Right. Like there is no doubt in our mind that from here on we are pointing ourselves to the Holy Week and like, I don't, there's just something about it for me because he says as they come down the mountain, he ordered them not to tell anyone what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So there's a little bit like, storytelling, foreshadowing there.
Right.
But yet like it's a really great way to lean into Lent a little bit. Like you could do 7 weeks of Lent now because of this. Like it would be a great way of leaning into that because there's an excitement, but then yet there's also like, what did we just experience? Also, right. Like he's telling us not to tell anyone, like,
Right. That's what gets me. I mean, the story itself, we don't see it anywhere else, right? We don't see Jesus do this anywhere. We see him walk on water into wine, we healing people, bringing them back to, we see those types of things. That there's something about the vulnerability of Jesus in these moments that he's willing to take these 3 guys, Peter, James, and John, up the mountain and go, here it is. You need to see this. And there's two things that fascinate me about it. You touched on one of them. But the first one is they don't know what to do. And the traditional thing that they did when they saw miracles and moments like this were to build shrines, to build something to remember it. Often it's a well, usually it's a stack of rocks. There's always something that we read throughout the Old Testament and the Hebrew culture that when you see something cool, you build a monument to remember it. And that's their response. They didn't know what else to do. They were like, this was something. Let's, like I said, let's make a t-shirt. Let's start a group. Let's build a shrine so we can come back to this place and remember it. And that's a huge piece of here's a touchstone now. Here's something that they can return to remember this moment that they had with Jesus because they know it's significant. But I love that Mark's gospel names, they didn't know how to respond. The disciples, the guys walking with Jesus, I mean, we're pretty deep into Mark's gospel. And they still don't know how to respond. They still don't know how to take all this in. They still don't know what to do with it, which gives me great hope that we're always learning, we're always growing, we're always doing these things. The second thing that grabs my attention the most is the thing that Jesus does so much throughout Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He'll do something like this and go, don't tell anyone. Why are we not telling everyone? And I get the purpose behind it and the length of the fullness of the story, but often when Jesus does something out of the ordinary, something Jesus-y, it's followed up with, now hang on to it. Hold on to it until after. Don't tell anyone yet.
Well, in Mark's gospel, that's a huge literary thing.
Huge.
It's called the Messianic Secret. I'll use what limited biblical knowledge I actually have. But what's key here is that, and I was thinking about this today. Like I was thinking about this, not really today, but on Sunday when we read Mark chapter 1 for the lectionary, the demons recognized who Jesus was, and Jesus was like, shut up. Like literally,
here's
like
the cliff.
like just shut it, demon. But it's easy for us on the outside to recognize like who Jesus is because we know the whole story. It's a whole other thing. Like obviously these three who are his inner circle in the Gospel of Mark, like these are his guys, like these are the guys. He obviously took them up there to equip them, to help like ground them. I always kind of see this as a grounding moment where he's grounding them so that way then when it hits the fan, these guys can actually assure them like it's going to be okay. Like now here's the thing. Jesus tells us then like this is a foreshadowing of his death. And I really think it goes over them because they're in the high holy moment. Now, granted, they're coming down the moment when he tells them not to say anything, but they would still be riding that high.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And like, it would be hard not to tell. And so holding on to that would almost kind of help you not understand what Jesus then says, what is to come.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, right? Like the story continues to go and so they kept it to themselves, wondering what is this rising from the dead? And they don't have a concept of resurrection, right? Like what does that mean? They there's a lot of wonder in what happens in the transfiguration from start to finish. And Jesus shows them who he is and then tells them what's going to happen. And they just don't know what to do with it. They have a lot of questions. And I think you're right. It's the reassurance because Jesus continues to tell that story of, well, there will be a day that I'm gone. I'll come back. And it's often, we don't know what that means, right? We don't understand Jesus. And you're right. This transfiguration is the reassurance to the leadership, the core guys who then go and, right, who are at the time of Pentecost doing the thing. That reassurance that we may not understand, but it's going to be okay. There's hope in the end. There's something bigger at stake here than what we know.
Well, and that's where, like in verse 6, where he's talking, the writer's talking about Peter. Um, he said these things, like, and he's referring to like making the shrines. He didn't know how to respond, for they were terrified.
Right.
And I mean, I know that if I were in an experience like this, I would be in holy awe. Verse 6. But yet, like, it's almost one of those things where, and I know you've experienced this and I've experienced this too. You have that overzealous church person that wants to do something, a very high D on the disc profile,
Right.
when that's not what we should be doing. Like, we need to sit and reverence with this. Like, we need to sit and soak with it a little bit, take a beat, whatever you need to do to have that experience, like to really take in the experience. But what does the D and Peter do? He's like, let's do this. And then Jesus shoots him down. Like, if you notice, like, suddenly looking around, like, it's almost like Peter says this, and then all of a sudden it was gone. Just so like, oh, we're not gonna let you remember this.
Right.
No pictures.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what Lent is, right? It's the season of the year that we take a beat to be present in who we are, who we've been created to be, to remember that we are dust, right? To fast, to give things up, to take on spiritual practices, to just be, to allow ourselves to be present rather than allow ourselves to build shrines or monuments or touchstones. Not so that we won't remember the things, but so that we would be present in them in the moment. I think, I don't know, for me, that's always what I have to remember during Lent. It's not about the busyness of the season. It's not about all of the things that kind of get in the way, but it's about being present in what is before us and where where and what the Spirit is telling us and pressing upon our hearts and souls in these moments. Yet again, I mean, we do it every year, and it's always, if we allow ourselves to be fully steeped in it, to just sit in those moments, to sit in the ashes, if you will. We see something new every year. We feel something new. It's a renewed sacred space, almost like coming back to the mountain to remember the Transfiguration, because that was such an important thing. It's that moment that we, when we don those ashes on our foreheads and remember that we are from dust and will return to dust. There's something sacred in that if we just sit in a moment, we see these things before us.
Well, and I think that that's what's important with Lent that I think gets overlooked. It's not about our practice.
Right.
It's about, how are we reconnecting with God? What are we doing that connects us with God or strengthens our connection with God? And I said that on Sunday. As I far too often, we say we're going to give up something, and then we barely make it through the week of Lent because it's not something that we're taking seriously. And then the other side of that too is that it doesn't affect our relationship with God. And like, for me, that's what Lent should be about, is centering ourselves. And like, either if you're going to give something up that is hindering your relationship between you and God. If you're going to take something on that's going to grow your relationship between you and God, not just to check a box. And I think sometimes Lent gets thrown into that check a box,
For sure.
that kind of category, more of a badge of honor than an actual spiritual time of recentering. And I think that's something I seem to find myself talking more and more about during Lent, as I'm getting older. But I think it's something that we have forgotten, that that's really what this season's about. It has nothing to do with not eating chocolate. If your eating of chocolate affects your relationship with God, then yeah, like, not a bad practice to take up. But if it doesn't do anything between you and your relationship with God, then why are you doing it? Like, I think that that's a good, like, thing to think about.
Yeah. Well, and that's just kind of, you look at the Transfiguration, and there's a vulnerability of Jesus of allowing these guys in even further than he already has. And in Lent is that for us, right? It's us being vulnerable in a way that allows ourselves and allows the Holy Spirit in a little further than we've ever let it. we have to be vulnerable in the ways in which we're present, whether that's with a group of folks like this, like Jesus did, whether it's with ourselves and God and everything in between. Like there's something significant about the season and the practice of Lent that we need to hold on to in the presence department. Like you said, recentering, doing the things that we can do, um, regardless of what people think. What is it for you that's going to draw you closer to center, the closer to the Spirit this season, and own it. Be, don't beat yourself up if you don't do it every day, right? Like take the steps that you need to take just to simply be present in this season.
Well, definitely give yourself grace,
Lots of
which
grace,
is
so much
which
grace.
is really what Jesus would have wanted you to do for your practice anyway.
Mhm.
Speaking of practices, Zach, where have you seen God at work this last week?
It's a really good question. All over the place. Well, I keep seeing God show up at our evenings, our new evening service that we had. We did our first dinner church this week, and kind of the whole idea we all the other weeks we do in the sanctuary, but on the first Sunday we're gathering down in our fellowship hall and gathering around the table, eating a meal together, doing church, doing communion. And we're just a few, like 4 weeks into having this new service, and it's, like anything, it's up and down, and it's during football game time, and so that messes with it. And we had no idea what to expect this last week, and just had all kinds of folks show up and just be present in it. Not quite sure, not knowing exactly what it was going to be. We didn't know exactly what it was going to be. The invitation at the beginning of the service was, we're going to have lots of opportunities to be graceful today, and just gather around the table and see what that looks like for us in these moments, because we don't know. And it was really cool to see people just lean into something totally different than what um, they may have experienced in church, in worship, in that setting. So it was super fun. Definitely in the hustle and bustle and stress of trying to put that together, and running around like a crazy person. It was cool to see where God showed up in those moments. How about you, Matthew?
You know, we had 11 inches of snow Saturday. And so
It's delightful.
um I know that that tickles your fancy a little bit. But I know for me, like what was amazing is like when you have those moments and like I showed up, even when I showed up at church on Sunday morning to get ready, noticing that our company hadn't come and done a lot yet. I got a little, I was like, oh no, like am I did I make a mistake? Should I have just gone ahead and, gone digital and, just started, kind of running through that gamut. So I went in my office and was sitting in my office doing kind of just getting ready, making sure I had things ready to get uh, things in order for Sunday morning. And all of a sudden I could hear the, and I was like, could that be, or is it, is it the main street? And I was like, so I walked out, looked in through our narthex and could see the snow plow. I was like, oh, today is going to be a good day. And, like, um, when I do the welcome, I usually say, this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And on poor weather days, it's hard for me to say this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice, because it's a little bit difficult when it doesn't look great outside. But the sun came out, and we had a fairly good attendance, all things considered. I know neighborhoods were horrible, but I know that people either tuned in online and slowly getting to understand what we're trying to do online. But then also the in-person crowd was great. We did at the first service, everybody's like, looks like everybody's going to get to greet everybody today, because they were a little thin, and we had fun with it. And I think that that's the thing, as we think about in the season when we have to wrestle with that. And that's one of the hardest things that we as pastors have to deal with. Um, when you get the tinkle from God, that little just like pull to do it, just go ahead and do it. And I'm not gonna lie, like a lot of churches in our area were closing, or going virtual or whatever they were doing. but I just kept getting this pull from God, like, just be faithful and it will be okay. And like, I felt that, like, even in the second service when I was still coming off of the flu and was not feeling 100%. I knew that God had me and I knew it was going to be okay. So
Love that.
yeah. So, we want to encourage you to keep listening. This is, we're, we've been doing this for 8 years and it seems like we still have a lot to learn. And so we want to encourage you to go to our website at beardedtheologians.com and check out all of our past episodes, as well as, pick up some gear for your loved one for Valentine's Day or for Lent or Easter or whatever holiday you may need a gift for, or even start planning for your white elephant cell gifts. It's not a bad time to do that now. And you can find all that at beardedtheologians.com. So for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Guys, I want you to subscribe and like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.